Well, it's really an honor to have Senator Maria Cantwell here. And in reviewing her amazing background today, a thought that kept sticking in my mind, having been around the world of politics a lot in my life, there was an expression about elected officials that goes something like this, that some people are show horses and some people are workhorses. And what I'm about to tell you, I think, is going to make it very clear which label applies to our Senator Cantwell. She hails from Indianapolis, Indiana. She attended Emmerich High School there and was voted by the public schools of the city of Indianapolis into its Hall of Fame. She graduated from Miami University in Ohio before moving to Seattle in 1984. And she came here to support Senator Alan Cranston's campaign for the U.S. Senate in that year, for the presidency, excuse me. And Senator Cranston was not successful, but after the campaign, Maria immediately moved to the suburb of Mount Lake Terrace, and she said it reminded her a little bit of Indianapolis. And she successfully managed a campaign to build a new library, 1984. After that campaign, she then moved to the Seattle suburb of Mount Lake Terrace. I said that. She ran for the state legislature, the House, and was elected in 1986 at the age of 28. She served there for 6 years until 1982, when she was elected to the House of Representatives. And she served a term in Congress before losing her seat in the famous election of 1994, the year of the contract on America. And it wasn't just Representative Cantwell who was turned out of office, but the likes of the Speaker of the House, Thomas Foley from Spokane, and Jay Inslee from the 4th District, where he served a term, and of course would later become our governor. That election in 1994 turned the Democrats out of controlling the House of Representatives that they had had for 40 years. She then briefly worked in the private sector as vice president of marketing for Real Networks. But in the year 2000, she decided to challenge the then seated Senator Slade Gorton for a seat in the United States Senate. And that election proved to be one of the closest in Washington State's history. She held a tiny lead in the initial returns on election night, but the race remained too close to call. After a legally mandated recount, she won by 2,229 votes, 0.09% out of a total of more than 250,000 cast across the state. It's fair to say that Senator Cantwell was born to politics. Her father, Paul Cantwell, served as county commissioner, city councilor, state legislator, and chief of staff for U.S. Representative Andrew Jacobs, Jr., and was the Democratic nominee for mayor of Indianapolis in 1979. Her mother, Rose, was an administrative assistant. Her ancestry includes Irish and German. Senator Cantwell is well known and highly respected for being one of the Senate's most distinguished workhorses. Her list of accomplishments is far too long for me to mention. We need her to have some time tonight. But I want to mention 7. Well, I could make it 8. Support for women's right to choose and contraception. The environment to oppose drilling for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Healthcare reform. The rights of LGBTQ plus people. Immigration reform, including a guest worker program and a path to citizenship for immigrants already here. Raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, and fighting sexual abuse in Olympic sports. But she's not all work. And when she went back to Congress, she became one of the first of 3 women to play in the annual congressional baseball game. So, Senator, we want to know if you got any hits. Please welcome Senator Maria Cantwell. You bet.
Well, thank you, Sam. Thank you very much for that. Great. Thank you for that nice introduction and all of that history, and making me feel a little tired, actually. But to be clear, I am the first woman in the history of the congressional baseball game to get on base. Now, I'm not afraid to admit it was a base on balls. Sometimes you just need to be discerning, and I try to be discerning. And I'm so proud to be here because Joel Conley, your resident, asked me to come tonight, and he is a longtime associate and covered me in politics for many, many years, and sometimes I appreciated that, and sometimes I didn't. But nonetheless, I so appreciate him, and it's great to be here with my former colleague, Jim McDermott, who also I thought was off in France making a wine, but apparently he is here with you, and very appreciate being here with him, and had a great dinner with some of the other key officials here who are part of your resident group and keep things busy. Now, I just want to clarify, I definitely came to Congress very aware that Warren Magnuson had defined the terminology, whether you were going to be a workhorse or a show horse. And not exactly sure how Maggie came to that definition, but I thought it was something that everybody in Congress knew, and so I was determined that I was going to be a workhorse. I find it very interesting that this has kind of gone to beyond our Washington delegation, but pretty much our Washington delegation knows this terminology, and we know its history, and it knows it belongs to Warren Magnuson. Our most recent House colleague, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, I don't think she really quite understood the full history, but when asked about it by the national press, she just said, "I ain't no show pony." And I thought, well, she's got it. Okay, she's figured it out, and she's going to be here to work, and she has been a workhorse on many, many issues. Well, it's so great to be at Horizon House, so great to be with many of you tonight, and I look forward to whatever questions you have. I'm sure you have a lot of questions about what the heck is going on in our nation. And just by looking at the room and reading the room, I would say you've been around a little bit longer than I have even. And you know the oddity that is being presented here in America today is just practically absurd. That this is a horrific challenge for our nation. When you think about the fact that this administration has undermined our elections, has challenged the rule of law, has tried to weaken the press, has basically tried to circumvent power of the courts, and certainly use the military in ways that we wouldn't use them, it is nonetheless say this is probably one of the most challenging times in our country's history, I think, in decades, and maybe even the biggest challenge to democracy that we've seen in our lifetime. So what do we do about it? And how do we fight back? And how do we still work to keep doing things that move our nation forward? For me, I've tried to look at the issues that Washington State cares most about and fight like hell on those issues. So when the administration said, I'm not going to give you fire money to help deliver fire forest reduction in Washington State, we yelled and screamed until they restored the fire money for Washington State. When they said they were going to stick into the largest bill, that big, beautiful bill that was actually pretty ugly, we were going to stick in a provision that said you could sell public land. We fought like hell. And we united our colleagues from Idaho and Montana and said, literally, you're going to sell public land to pay a tax break for billionaires? The answer to that has to be hell no, and we forced Mike Lee to take it out of the bill. And probably one of the biggest victories that we've had is when my Republican colleague from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, Congressman Scalise, said, let's stick into the big, beautiful bill a federal preemption on AI that would run over any state law, consumer protection or not, on AI. And let's say there is no federal preemption, there is no federal law replacing it. Let's just get rid of all the laws and let's just have a federal preemption against all state laws, including consumer protection laws. Like it would have gotten rid of robocalls. I mean, it would have gotten rid of the law that protects you on robocalls. It would have been a disaster. And literally, it was already stuck in the bill when it came to the Senate. And so we had to work like heck, and I had to find a colleague, and I did. Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, who was willing to fight back. And guess what? In the end, we defeated them so badly that we won 98-1 because we embarrassed all of our colleagues and made them support making sure we protected the privacy of Americans, the rights of Americans, and are not just going to let AI run over the top of us. So I didn't think we'd have to fight like heck. Anybody here from the other side of the state, Richland, Washington? Nope. But guess what? We've been planning for decades how to clean up nuclear waste and get a plant started that basically would start processing the waste and putting it into glass vitrified logs. We've spent billions of dollars and spent 25 years getting it ready to this point, and the Trump administration and the Secretary of Energy said, I don't think we're going to do that. And we said, the hell you're not. And Senator Murray and myself pressed the case to the degree that they had to start up the process and give us our money so we could finally start processing the waste at Hanford. So these are all fights that are happening every single day. Every single day. These are just the ones that have happened in the last 5 months, okay? So there are fights that are happening every single day. And I want to get to your questions and hear what you guys want to talk about tonight. But I want to mention a couple of things that we've been working on in a very grand way that we think are so important. First of all is this fight on tariffs. The administration doesn't understand the Constitution, doesn't understand that the power of Congress is established here, and basically started tariffing products and countries around the world, which we objected to. And we now went and found 7 Republicans to join 7 Democrats to say, this is the prerogative of Congress, not an executive branch power. and it lies within the Constitution with Congress. And you have to come to us to get this approved. So you can imagine our delight when the Supreme Court recently had its hearing and the Trump administration came and sat before them, and the justices were pretty uniform in saying that a tariff was an import tax, plain and simple. So I just want you to know that I'm leading the largest bipartisan effort in the United States Senate to try to stop the Trump administration from artificially raising prices on Americans by having huge tariff increases in our administration. And I'm sure near and dear to everybody here is the issue of health care and how we can make health care more affordable. It is so challenging to work in this environment where, again, the rollbacks of the Affordable Care Act, the changes to Medicaid and Medicare, all at the expense of giving, again, tax breaks to corporations and billionaires when instead making the investments in what will keep Americans healthy and basically the quality of life that we deserve. So I'm going to ask Jim a hard question. Maybe he's not ready.
So I can hear it.
Okay. Jim, do you remember the basic health plan?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So our state, what was great about the Affordable Care Act, Republicans won't tell you this, and I know we're in a bipartisan group here, so I'm just trying to tell you what's happening back there right now. The Affordable Care Act drove the amount of uninsured in half, from 14 to 7%. In our state, we drove it down to 4%. And we did that by expanding Medicaid to a larger population of people and then trying to come up with other solutions to expand care for that. I stuck into the Affordable Care Act, the basic health plan. The basic health plan is like Costco. When you buy in bulk, you get a discount. And what the basic health plan did for us is basically allowed us to bundle up a population that had no clout because they didn't work for a large employer. They didn't have any way to drive down the cost like a Boeing could or a Microsoft could. But if you allowed states to bundle that population up and drive a bargain with people by saying, I got 100,000 customers for you, then you could get a discount. So I put that into the Affordable Care Act, and now several years later, 5 states have implemented this provision of the Affordable Care Act, and it's $2,500 per person cheaper than anything you can buy on the exchange. And I'm fighting now in this big debate to expand this to an even broader population across the United States of America. So there are solutions that work. There are things that we should be doing, but I guarantee you the ones that are being pursued by this administration are very challenging. And so you have to fight back. You have to fight back. You have to fight for your state. You have to fight for investments and fight for smart ideas that you can get your colleagues to join and fight back too. And one of the biggest concerns that I have now, because when I think about maybe the courts will help us. Maybe the next election will help us. Maybe just getting my colleagues to stand up and override him on something will help us. We in the Northwest, other than Maryland and Virginia, because there's a big NIH and government footprint in those states, but basically we're tied with them right now. We have more scientists per capita than any state in America except for those 2, and we're basically tied with them because they have a good big public footprint. Seattle is the most scientific city in America now, with the most STEM people. So when you think about okay, if a new president comes along, we'll change this immigration policy. If a new president comes along, we'll go back to being not only observers of democracy, but insurers of democracy around the globe. But one thing we can't tolerate is a gap in science that stops us on agriculture, that stops us on healthcare, like cancer research, that stops us on environmental solutions, on energy, that stops us on so many things. So you bet, when I get my chance, and maybe you'll see me, I'm going to give a major filibuster about the undermining of America's future opportunity by a president who doesn't understand science and is trying to gut it at every step of the way. And we need to be loud and clear that this is a cut that we in America, the land of innovation, the land of opportunity, the people who've delivered us so many solutions, we cannot tolerate. And we need to move forward as a nation and bet on Americans, because if you bet on Americans, they will do the rest. And that's what I'm fighting for. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight.
Thank you, Senator. I particularly want to thank Joel for persisting in helping us get speakers, and particularly Senator Cantwell. The two of them know each other well. So I think we should give Joel the honor of the first question tonight.
This is a kind of one of the many issues in which you have specialized, and that is promoting agricultural exports from this state, and particularly opening the market in India to Washington apples. And I would like you to explain what the consequences are, using this as an example of, will Trump tariffs cost us that market? And if we lose that market, what are the chances of getting it back?
Good question. Good question. First Trump administration created a war on tariffs, and the retaliation by India, basically, it was about a $130 million market. More importantly, it's about 40,000 jobs, depending on the Apple economy. And that is what really mattered. Somebody probably leaned against that wall back there. Yeah, there we go. And because we went to India and basically pleaded with Modi to open up the market again, and when he wanted us to participate after the Chips and Science Act with partnerships on that, we made sure that we would get the Apple market open and reestablished. So it's now open, but now we're back into another tariff war. I think soybeans are a really good example. We don't grow a lot of soybeans here, but we ship the heck out of soybeans out of our ports. And in the first Trump administration, we were probably at 50+ % of the market, something like that, with soybeans. And the first Trump administration's tariff war drove that down to 36%. And we barely got back above that. And now we're in another trade war. So ask any soybean grower in America what he thinks about these policies. When you lose shelf space, you don't get it back. It used to be that, the first 100 years of our agriculture or aviation or whatever, there wasn't a heck of a lot of competition. But trust me, there's a lot of competition now. So if you get in a big trade war and you don't get your product on the shelf and somebody else supplies it, how are you going to get back on that shelf space? And that's what he's not calculating. And we can't afford to lose that. We want farmland in America. We want our agriculture independence. We want to produce product. And 95% of consumers live outside the United States. So that's a damn big market to sell agriculture products to. Big market.
We'll take questions by section, so let's start on this side, and John has a microphone for the far side, and May in the middle. So anybody back here? Can you pass this back to Tom?
So I'm very pleased to hear you defend science, which is really critical. But what can we do about all the terrible cuts that have been made to science?
We need to hold people accountable for the fact that these are long-term impacts. If the scientists go over to Europe because that's where the money is to do research, and it takes you, years to get them back, or it takes years to get the science that they produce, we have to explain this to people. We have to explain to our Republican colleagues that even though Trump proposed a budget that basically decimates those funds, that Republicans in the Senate need to stand up for level funding. They need to stand up. So any letter you can write, I know a lot of people here may or may not, you have contacts all over the country. Start a campaign. If we're the most science STEM city in America, let's go. Let's raise the roof on this issue and explain it. So in the State of the Union, when it's not really the first time the President of the United States speaks in his term, it's not really called the State of the Union, but basically the first time Trump spoke to Congress, I invited Dr. Paul Lang to be my guest from the University of Washington. Dr. Lang created a prostate cancer research center that literally basically helped reduce the mortality rate by 10 years for prostate cancer by his research. And he participated in press conferences, went around and spoke to my Republican colleagues, told them this was nuts that they wanted to cut this science. But we need to raise the roof on this and educate our Republican colleagues and ask them, are you going to hold the line on science? Are you going to cut America's competitiveness by underinvesting in research that is so desperately needed?
I'm out in the Fireside Lounge. I noticed that the money for the bomb, I guess they call it a bomb cyclone in the Bellevue, Issaquah area, has not been approved and keeps not being approved. And that money is probably higher than some of the other states. And if you've seen it, it was pretty devastating. I'm sure you probably have. Is there any way that can be pushed through or gotten some money for that area?
Yeah, or through the legislative process and support. But we can, listen, holding people hostages from emergencies or holding states that you don't like and not giving them resources is not the way we need to go. I don't know what the particular problem is on that damage, but I'm happy to work with you if Josie or somebody can go out there. Yeah.
Why do the farmers keep voting for it? I mean, yeah, he did the same thing to him the last time he was in, and he's done it again. How do we get to those people that are out in the small towns so they make their vote change?
I think even this time, when I was gathering those 7 Republicans to help me, and believe me, they were pushing back. The White House was saying, don't you dare sign on to her legislation. Don't you dare. They all wanted to see what deals he would come up with. So in the first administration, they saw, and they didn't really like it, but they weren't really loud about it. And then he came and got a bunch of money to help pay off the farmers right before the election. So he didn't really make them whole. He basically just came up with taxpayer dollars because he didn't get a deal. China reneged. China didn't do even what it said it would do. It was not an official trade agreement where they actually had them committed to delivering. So now I think farmers are less likely to buy this. They are protesting more now. But even my colleagues said at the beginning of the year, well, wait, I want to see what deals he can get. Or at least I want to be able to call the White House and tell them I want to be part of this deal. And I think that we're now, 9-10 months into this tariff process. We can see exactly what it's gotten us, and it's not producing for us the opening of markets that we would like to see. Again, we have a difference of philosophy, but we're one of the most trade-dependent states in the nation. we got all these ports and we believe in exporting things we make and grow. So I do think you'll see a different result in Eastern Washington. I do think you'll see people standing up. It may take until the Supreme Court says that the tariffs are illegal. It may take that moment before they really, really stand up. And hopefully that'll happen in the next 2 to 3 months. Or over here. Okay.
Senator, the question I have is with regard to ICE, what do we do to, first of all, unmask all of the alleged law enforcement, immigration enforcement that's going on? And is there any concern that many of these employees of ICE may be those same individuals that were on the assault on the Congress on January 6th?
Well, I hope not. I hope that nobody has, been prosecuted for that and then is appearing on ICE. But yes, these people should be unmasked. You shouldn't basically, the president said we're going to go after dangerous criminals, and yet we're going after our friends and neighbors and people and leaving them and their families, without resources. And so I do think that we should pass legislation that basically shows who these people are and what their processes are. No one likes to be stopped or detained by somebody they don't even know. They don't even know who they are. And so that is something we have to fight to change. I'm glad that we've been fighting back and the courts have been helping us, but we have a lot more work to do. And if you saw this really great moment of real anxiety and concern when Speaker Johnson said there's terrible things happening in these protests across America. And he basically said, yeah, I'm very worried about the naked bicycle protesters in Portland, Oregon. It's very upsetting. I was like, we have a different idea about what's really upsetting.
I have a question regarding cloture being used in the Senate. I hope you are doing it to prevent some of these MAGA bills. Like I got an email saying that Ted Cruz wants to go after every nonprofit organization that was helping with the No Kings rallies. But, that's just an example of a MAGA bill. Hopefully, are you stopping those through cloture?
You meaning through a cloture motion,
Yeah.
mean? Or yeah. Well, so I have the distinction of being the ranking Democrat on the Commerce Committee, which is one of the biggest committees in Congress and has huge oversight. And the now chairman of the committee is Senator Cruz. So trust me, I have a day job every day that is fighting things that he wants to do that basically really are more political than they are, about a solution. At the beginning of the year, he basically wanted to support the president in basically, looking at taking over the Panama Canal. And then he supported the president in basically trying to go and acquire Greenland. And then he wanted to have us basically put SeaTac and other airports who basically allowed, immigrants to come through there, basically withdraw their funds. So it's a full-time job just dealing with him and all of those bills. But I'm happy to say we sustained on every one of those issues. And finally, when I said to the committee, so you want to sit here and keep, doing this silliness about airports? Or do you want a shipbuilding bill where we focus on establishing maritime jobs in the United States of America? And my other colleagues, Republicans on the committee, said, here, here. So there are enough people who want to do the serious work, but there are other people who just want to play these games of politics because they think it scores, more notoriety. And so, yes, we use every tactic that we can. I don't know, you guys probably heard about the horrific DCA air crash that happened. And, the president said it was DEI. He blamed DEI. And literally, my committee and me, like, I don't think I left my couch for 4 days, except for to go on CNN and review them. And by day 5, they sent a press person back into the White House and they said, Mr. President, is it DEI? And he said, oh, probably not. But that's because we had won the debate. We had won the debate. We had forced the question. And, nobody remembers that, but that's what we had to do because we had worked so hard to get more air traffic controllers in a bill. We knew exactly what was happening, and we knew it wasn't DEI. So it's a constant, and you use any tool that you have. So you use the courts, or you use the news and awareness, or you use convincing your colleagues, and you just try to, stop the fray and say, let's focus on real problems. And, oftentimes you can get some people who are willing to do that. Not as much as we need, but,
Got one over here.
over here.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the immigration issue because it's ghastly. And I have come on, most of us know that once they've detained people who are actually citizens or green card holders, they're held in horrendous conditions, absolutely horrendous. Is there anything that can be done about that? And he's just put in more money for building more centers. Can anything be done about this situation?
One of the reasons I'm fighting so hard on tariffs, I'm pretty sure he's using the tariff money to fund Homeland Security to do this work. So, this is a huge expense and cost that they're doing. And so taking away that resource of revenue would be one thing. But yes, we've had people in our state. We had a machinist from Everett, Washington, detained at this incredible facility, and we were able to get him out. But yes, we have to close those facilities run by private organizations that can't meet the letter of the law. And we have to stop just throwing anybody into those facilities. These aren't dangerous criminals. This guy worked at Everett. So we have to stop those facilities and try to slow down the revenue. Well, there's a bill that many of us are on, myself, Cory Booker, Adam Smith, and we are trying to close those facilities. But they're going to keep doing this. If you think about, we've had to use the courts to try to stop and turn around planes, literally deporting people without due process. What are we in the United States of America if we are not for due process? What are we? And so we need to enforce the law, and we got to use the courts where we can and use our leverage, with the purse where we can.
Senator, I have a question. Here in the metropolitan area on the west side of the Cascade Divide, we don't get a whole lot of information about central and eastern Washington. You travel around the state a lot. Is there something in the central and eastern part of the states that we don't know that you think we should?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I'm sure there's people here that know a lot about those areas, but Secretary Moniz, the energy secretary at the time during the Obama administration, came here, and we had a couple of meetings in Seattle. And I said, well, I just need you to know that the national laboratory that you oversee in Richland, Washington, the Pacific Northwest National Lab, isn't as well known here in Seattle. And, he thought I was kidding, and I said, the University of Washington is a lot of research dollars, but basically you're spending like $2 billion over there. And people don't know that. And so he talked and he said to this group of people, he said, can you believe people don't know where PNNL is? And somebody in the audience said, well, where is it? And so he finally got the picture. So we've been working very hard to try to, again, if we're this great research innovation state, how do we unite the research that's happening in the central part of our state with the efforts over here? And they're doing unbelievable work on all sorts of, we have the largest, the nation has decided that Richland, Washington, you should figure out battery storage that can scale to the grid. So the biggest problem is, how do you take battery storage and scale it so that it actually can add power to the grid? That's what that national laboratory is doing there. That national laboratory doing unbelievable work on lots of other things. Moses Lake is becoming an epicenter of innovation like nobody's business. Why? Because they had an airport and they had infrastructure, but they have some of the best carbon fiber companies that are being built. They are again, a battery hub where they are trying to take, instead of having silicon nodes, they're trying to diversify off of battery technology so that you can have like 5 times the amount of battery storage. And, Moses Lake is becoming an epicenter. You can just look it up. They're growing leaps and bounds. And Spokane is also diversifying and growing leaps and bounds. So we're growing here in Puget Sound immensely, but those places are also growing. And the number one thing that people are looking at across the nation, and I've traveled quite a few places, the thing that people are saying about our state is, oh, well, you have cheap electricity, you have a manufacturing workforce, and you're going to be the epicenter of AI. Let's go there. That's what people are saying. I saw a company in downtown San Francisco, and they said, yeah, come see what we have. I said, what is that? And they said, well, we took a salmon stem cell from the Issaquah hatchery, and we're growing salmon in downtown San Francisco. And they had a little sushi bar there. And they wanted to know what I thought it tastes like. But they said, but now that we know to scale this, we're going to move the manufacturing facility back up to, they said, Arlington, Marysville area. And I said, why are you going to go there? Again, same thing. Cheap electricity, manufacturing workforce, going to be the epicenter of AI. So I know we're going to have some economic challenges around the globe, but there's nothing that's going to slow down our state. Our state is going to continue to grow. And I'm very honored to represent it and represent all of you and try to fight for these things. But literally, Washingtonians are helping solve some of the biggest problems in our nation. They really are. And the UW leads in that, and so does PNNL.
I'm concerned about the gerrymandering that's going on around the country, and I realize that you can't do anything about that. But I've read that even now there's been so much going on that the Republicans can control Congress for lots of years. And I don't know. Do you have any comments about that?
Well, I think the courts are going to end up weighing in on this question, and whether there's been fair representation, in those districts, and how were they formed, and were they formed by a commission, or were they, truly gerrymandered? So we'll see which one of those. But I do worry about the whole process. I do. I like when you do it, by a commission of people who really do consider, the dynamics of the population and what you're trying to represent. We had a pretty interesting case in Central Washington where the courts said we were gerrymandering Hispanic community out of representation and basically forced them to draw a new line. So there are legitimate issues here to be considered, but unfortunately, when people just throw that all to the wind and say, oh, I'm just going to do it for political purposes, we have to rely on the courts. We have to rely on the courts to set them straight. And I do applaud, Sam mentioned Indiana earlier. I do applaud the fact that Republicans in Indiana said, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. We're not going to gerrymander. We're not going to do it. And, I applaud them for that. And hopefully people who are following a process, to basically, consider these issues. And they're really important. We want people to have representation, and we don't want a population to be gerrymandered out of that representation. And that's what was happening in the South Yakima area, where the Hispanic community was being drawn out of it so that it couldn't elect Hispanic representatives. And so the courts helped us address that. So I'm hoping the courts will set this straight.
Yes, a few years ago, Congress appeared to almost enact an immigration reform bill. What are the possibilities of that occurring again in this Congress for true immigration reform?
In this administration?
In this Congress?
Well, if you let it up to just us, the president has made, immigration a dirty word, and I think it's a global phenomenon. This isn't just a U.S. problem. You have millions of people traipsing all over the world because of instability, because of famine, because of drought, because of all sorts of problems. And stabilizing this and getting people to stay where they can is a better solution. But at the same time, the very first bipartisan immigration bill that I saw was Ted Kennedy and Larry Craig. I don't know if people remember Larry Craig from Idaho. I'm pretty sure Ted Kennedy and Larry Craig did not have a lot in common, but they could agree on an immigration bill. And then you had John McCain and other people try to get an immigration bill. So you've had this same duo of Democrat and Republicans who are willing to do it, more so in the Senate than in the House. And, I think you could get there without the influence of Trump. I really think there's enough pieces now that people see in the challenges that we face. One of the farmers from, the farm community from our state basically said, we won't get there with the House of Representatives until Southern farmers come to the table and ask, that we get this done, until they feel affected. And I think they're starting to feel affected in places like Florida and in Georgia. I don't know if but you're not going to get it under this president, not this president. He has demonized the issue. I don't think he really understands the effect that it's having on farmers, so we'll have to wait another day. But there, even Dan Newhouse and I think Dan and Pramila, again, Dan representing Central Washington, Pramila representing right here in Seattle, they agreed on a bill, okay? If they can agree on a bill, I'm pretty sure a lot of people in between those two can agree on a bill. I like the fireside people. You're fired up out there.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Senator. Springs, we've had massive demonstrations, not only in blue Seattle, but all over the country. And each time they've called for a demonstration, it's tripled or doubled in number. Does any of that impact the people you're working with on the other side of the aisle?
Good question. Good question. I do think that it registers with them. I do think that the, protests, particularly around the King rallies of saying, look, this is not a king. I think, I think helped bring a sharp focus to it. Do I think they paid more attention to the November elections in New Jersey and Virginia and other places around the country? I mean, I think that spoke volumes, but don't hesitate. Getting out and doing these things is raising awareness. And I do think they notice. I do. And it's having an impact. Here too. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to know what you would say to a young person now who might be interested in a future political life, but is feeling extremely discouraged. And the other part of the question is, are you seeing young people still being drawn to a life of service in politics and having any hope?
Anthony, get up here. No, come on, Anthony. You're that shy? Get up here, Anthony. Come on. Say something. Say something. Say what happened to you, why you decided to get involved.
I I grew up in a small town in Southwest Washington. I was raised by some Republicans who I disagreed with, but I appreciated them. And I think politics became too divisive, and I really wanted to make it less so. I wanted to be a teacher. That's what my degree is in. I wanted to be a history teacher. And I just have hope for the future. I really do. I became an intern in DC with Maria Cantwell. And then after that, I joined her campaign, and we fought really hard. We knocked on so many doors. We were told we were going to lose that election, and we won it by a lot, a lot more than the last time. And I was very proud of that work because I saw a lot of younger people working with people who are closer to your guys' age. With the door knocking today, you use a phone and you use apps, and some of the older folk had trouble with that, so we paired them with younger people. And that cooperation really is inspiring when you get younger and older people participate in the political process. And then that's why I met Senator Cantwell. I drove her around, gave her some history lessons. And she really... And she was interested in what I had to say. And I think as long as all our politicians are paying attention to our young people, then they can have an active participation in the future political process. Look at recent elections. Young people get hyped. The internet's out there. They want to participate. They're ready. We just need to push them. And I think we will do that. I'm 23 years old. I turned 24 on Sunday. One more year and I can run for Congress.
Way to go. Way to go. Thank you. Good job.
Over here. Over there. Can you stand up? We can't hear you. Put it like an ice cream cone.
I want to go back to your comment where you're noticing of the elections in New Jersey and in Virginia. Have we also talked about the elections in Spokane? And I see on the public television, what is it called? But the other one, the something. Anyway, that was throughout the state apparently, that from little towns that the people are shifting. And then I hear on the stations that I listen to, which is public television and public radio, that there are cracks that are finally being shown in the Republican Party. I read that Representative Green or Senator Green was from Georgia, that she's going to resign now. Is there something happening? Do you see it happening near you?
Yes, I see my colleagues who, look, it's hard to take on an entire administration, particularly one that's so vindictive. And when you think about it, they're just trying to hold out the best options for their constituents. They literally are trying to think like, how do I serve my state? And if they come from, like Alaska, okay, like Senator Murkowski, or they come from, some other state, they're trying to think, how do I deliver? But now that, it's a lot clearer what the president's, plans are on things like tariffs or, what he was able to get as far as deals, I think you're starting to see the cracks in that. There are Republicans who are standing up. Now, did I have other colleagues like my colleague from North Carolina who just said, instead of being intimidated, I'm just going to quit? And so you've had, I would say my colleague from Iowa also, did the same thing. She's like, okay, I can just take a beating from this guy, or I can just say I'm not running for reelection. And so that's what happened. So it's just very hard to stand up, but as more and more people are seeing that, and as you have bolstering by the public, they're going to get braver and braver. And I'm hoping that these court decisions, as I said, will also help them, through that process. So,
Senator, a political...
And, there are some people right now who will say that this president is a lame duck president. But after next year's election, they will really be saying it. And I don't care who's president of the United States. When you're in your last 2 years, I don't know if Jim, if you want to cooperate on this, people start caring a lot less about what they think because they're on their way out. And they just start, dealing with them differently.
Senator, I was going to ask you a question on that point. What do you forecast might happen after the next elections, regardless of whether the Democrats make big gains or not, when it comes to the party focusing on presidential nominees? Pete Buttigieg is already out working. Pritzker from Illinois has been giving some speeches, and some others. What's your sense about how we might figure out which 2 or 3 people are going to be the leaders of the party?
Well, my personal opinion is that Democrats have to go back to our roots of talking about the key issues that make the economy work. And it's clear that affordability is the centerpiece of what's on people's minds. And I think whoever the Democrat nominee is, they have to be full-throated about this. Unfortunately, the last Democratic administration inherited, because of COVID, 9% inflation because of COVID, but brought that down to 3% in 1 year. Have you ever heard of anybody doing that? Inflation from 9 to 3%? Did you ever hear him say that at all? Did he ever say, I want to fight like hell to make it even lower, and it's unsustainable, these costs on healthcare, these costs letting food mergers happen between Albertsons and Kroger's and all this stuff, and making food more expensive or making healthcare more expensive? No, you didn't hear that. And Democrats have to go back to focusing on pocketbook issues and talking about how we're going to grow the middle class in America again. The United States of America is not about a stratified economy of very rich and very poor. The United States of America is about having a strong middle class, and the next Democratic nominee better know how to speak to that.
As someone who has just been here for 13 months, and I lived in Yakima for 41 years before that, and I read the Yakima Herald every day. You don't hear a lot when you're talking about Eastern Washington about the city of Yakima. And there are some reasons. There are some reasons not to talk about Yakima. But I think I use it to point out that things happen at different rates in different cities. For example, Yakima had a very good turnout for the No Kings rally. There are people there who are ready to do things. However, the city council, in just a couple of weeks ago, voted out the last moderate Republican. There are no Democrats whatsoever on it. And all the gerrymandering or rearranging of areas in Yakima, which even involved my home, didn't really do any good. There aren't any, I don't think there's any Hispanics on the city council whatsoever. So in some places, things move kind of slowly.
Well, I want you to know that I care a lot about Yakima, and as I mentioned earlier, it is a producer, 3 counties in that area of our state produce about $3 billion worth of economic activity every year. So we shouldn't take it for granted, and we should pay more attention to it. And so, we do have to fight for these democracy issues. And when 3 Hispanic women ran for that legislative district, the Republican Party put out a text message in Spanish saying that they wanted to castrate your kids at school. And I raised hell about it, got it published in the newspaper, and asked every Republican to refute that and to say that that was irresponsible and should be condemned. And the person that I was running against that year, Dr. Garcia from that area, he repudiated it. But the head of the Republican Party, who was out also in the legislature, said, no, this is fine. These kind of tactics are fine. And we have to pay more attention. And the challenges that we face in rural areas who have less and less broadcast or newspaper or competition for media, we got to pay more attention. But it's a very special part of our state, and it's going to, including being the home of who, Joel? William O. Douglas. William O. Douglas. So, yeah. Yes.
A few years ago, you were on a trip to China, and at the end of this, you were talking in terms of the Chinese initiatives in clean energy sources. I'm talking about how we had the technology advantage, but the Chinese were worried about their rivers, worried about the Himalayan glaciers melting and cutting down the flow of the Yangtze and so on. The Chinese were being very, very aggressive in developing the next generation of technology, of energy sources, and things that would reduce the emission of gunk into the atmosphere. As a result of the stopping and the starting and the policy of the Trump administration and so on, are we losing that technological edge with which we went into this century?
Yes. Yes. And that's the point. I always like to say the first 100 years of aviation, who were we competing against? Okay, maybe McDonnell Douglas. Okay, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. Okay, first 100 years. Second 100 years, we're competing against everybody. We're competing against the Brazilians. We're competing against the Canadians. We're competing against the Chinese. We're competing against everybody. There's a world demand for 40,000 airplanes right now. So you bet a bunch of people are going to go try to build airplanes and do it a lot cheaper than we're doing it. So it's the same on energy. They had insatiable demand. If China wanted to become an industrial economy, it needed energy. So they got smart about solar and wind and even on electric vehicles, and now are outpacing us in some of these areas. And the reason why the Trump administration has tried to pull back on all the investments we made in tax incentives is beyond me. Even his high-tech friends will tell him, we need all of the generation we can get, even from clean energy sources. So the larger problem is that you want to be able to serve the whole world. You want to lead in technology where you can sell to the whole world. And if we lose this race because they get smarter about technology, then it makes it very hard, on this clean energy initiative. So I still think we have a lot of great things going for us, but they just took a lot of money out. The Trump administration took a lot of money out of clean energy. So we had authorized a hydrogen initiative. They basically have decimated that. We had a lot still going on solar and wind. They've disincentivized that. And it's going to be challenging, to say the least, if we don't turn this policy around in short order. So we are looking for Republicans who will disagree with the president on this, who come from states that they want to see these incentives restored so we can grow a higher mix. At the same time, I mentioned a few of us had dinner that, we're an epicenter for fusion technology. We have 4 companies here in the state of Washington that are trying to crack the code, if you will, on how to develop fusion power. And if they are successful, it could be a huge sea change. So hopefully the administration won't, curtail those efforts. But the world is just going to have an insatiable demand for energy. We need to diversify off of fossil fuels because the climate, AI is going to demand it. We have a developing world. So were we not the country of Ben Franklin? Are we not the people that invented electricity? Okay, why are we giving up on this? Okay, did FDR not electrify the United States of America and rural economies and deliver it everywhere? Why are we giving up on this? We should be incenting more and leading more. There isn't a country in this world that doesn't need a cheaper, cleaner source of electricity. And why would he give up that market? I just don't know.
Senator, thank you. I think we've got time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
Let's take one over here.
Yeah.
And then Hugh, you get to have the last question.
Thank you, Senator. I, like probably other people in the room, am overwhelmed by all the chaos that we have going on here. And I'm wondering what's happening out there as the administration seems to have dismasted all of our military command and is alienating all of our allies to the point where the Five Eyes are no longer telling us what's going on. Is anybody taking care of the stuff that is too far away for us to worry about?
When you said, what goes on here, I think you meant in the United States. Is that what you meant? Yeah. The current 28-point plan for Ukraine is a perfect example. That is not an acceptable plan. And the United States should never give up intelligence support to Ukraine. Why should we do that? Why should we do that? We should never give up that support to them. The president, in my opinion, misunderstands NATO. I don't think he likes alliances. I'm saying in the most interconnected, innovative economy of the future with information, why in the hell do you want to become an isolationist? I don't get it. And so I think we should be building alliances. And right now, the Ukraine is a perfect test. If we want to have influence here, continue to sanction Russia. Continue to let the European economy take the spoils of ill-gotten Russian gains and use that to support Ukraine. Don't sit here and try to say to Putin, "Oh, don't worry, I won't give Ukraine any military allies." You have allies, so they will tell you intelligence stuff about what's going on. That's why you have them. And we need a more sustained, I believe, support of NATO and this question going forward. But that's just one example. And there are ways to counter other countries. Build alliances. I'm saying what we need right now is a tech NATO. What I'm saying is create an alliance from the 5 most sophisticated technology countries, us, Japan, Europe, maybe Australia. And we say, okay, if you want to sell technology, then number 1, you can't have a government backdoor. Okay? You have to respect privacy. You have to do these things. You can't have all these, ill devices embedded into infrastructure everywhere. And the United States, if we led that charge and we communicated that, I think we would have a counterpoint to China. But how have we done this in the past? We've done it by building alliances, not shunning the rest of the world. And certainly not leaving, these problems up. You turn around, that's exactly when you need somebody to be supportive. And so I'm for, your point is very important because, what do you do? What do you do if you basically, dissolve this relationship with so many countries that we've had such great relationships with.
Okay, Hugh, go ahead.
Senator, is there any sign that your Republican colleagues are ready to work in good faith to get at the issues of affordable care and Medicaid cutbacks?
I think, okay, don't boo, okay? But believe it or not, the person who says they want to do the most right now, and my Republican colleagues will say, he's more like you, he wants to spend money. That is the president. The president apparently thinks spending more and doing more on healthcare is an important thing to do. Some of my other Republican colleagues have been pronounced about never voting for the Affordable Care Act again. In fact, they have had 70 votes against it. So some of them find it harder to retract what they've said in the spirit of finding a solution. So you just noticed in the last 24 hours, I don't even really know what it means. I'm not even sure what it means. But the president, of all the people in the House and Senate, the president of the United States said, here's how we should fix the Affordable Care Act, and put a proposal on the table. And then we were all waiting. Where's the language? Let's see it. What is he saying? What does it actually say? And guess what happened? He got so much pushback from members of his own party that he wouldn't put out the language. And so it's going to be interesting the next 2 weeks to see what exactly is the proposal. We have to vote on this by December 13th, I think, and we'll see, what they come up with. I have long said, my basic health plan is a good idea. There's other ideas to drive down the cost. Democrats should be full-throated about continuing to want to drive down cost, rein in the PBMs, these middlemen who drive up the prices of drugs. There should be FTC enforcement against these people. It's crazy what they're getting away with. And so we'll see what each side comes up with in this process. But apparently a lot of Republicans, I was just say, I'm not going to name the name, but I had a colleague right before I left the Senate to come home here, and we were talking about a couple of different things that had happened. And I said, do you think we can get a deal on health care? And he said, I don't know, that's your issue. And I said, you mean me? You mean that's my issue? Because I've been quite vocal about. He said, no. I mean, your party. That's your party's issue. And that's how some of them see it. They see it as like something we campaigned on, something that we want, and they're more for just let the private sector, drive whatever. So I do think it's going to be at this critical moment, we can't play games. Like, even though the information age is making all of this happen and we're more divided than ever because we get to watch our own show and hear this one pitch and just do this one thing, you have to refuse the temptation and really try to focus on what is good for the American people and the American economy to move forward. And the Affordable Care Act may not be perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we had before. And let's keep working to improve it, and let's drive down the cost of healthcare. It is achievable. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. It's pretty clear why the people of Washington have elected Senator Cantwell to a 5th term in the United States Senate.